Thank you. If you're wondering what this little cheering section is here, so I've been a teacher at the Writer Studio online for many, many years, lately teaching 2 memoir classes, an introductory one and an advanced one. And I've got a group of my memoir students who've come in from all over the tri-state area, and we've never met. Well, Pamela and I have met once, but the rest of them I've never met in person before. I've only seen them, down to here. So it's very exciting, and I'm happy to have the rest of you and an old friend, fellow mom from PS3, and an artist in the neighborhood, and oh, hello, who's under there? Oh, it's Marianne, an old friend from grad school days. Really nice to have all of you. So I'll tell you how much I love my branch libraries. On Friday, I had hoped it would happen today, but it didn't. I am going to have an essay up in LitHub that's an appreciation of the time I spent at the branch libraries with my kids. But we're lucky in the West Village, we have 2 library branches, this in Jefferson Market, which just reopened after a long renovation. So on Friday, we're hoping we can coordinate to have Emile the librarian back there, the fine librarian, maybe send a link when it comes out to everybody who attended. So let me, since I mentioned him, let me give a big thank you to Emile, who's been just terrific to work with. And I think I'll just start and read a couple of excerpts from the novel. I was telling my students I try to read a different one every time I do a reading or do something online, just, so I don't get bored, so people don't see the same one over and over again. So I found a little excerpt that happens to mention various locations in the tri-state area. So I thought, in honor of all these people who came in, I'd read that little section. And then so this is an outdoors scene, part of the first tour that the tour guide is giving. That the main character is a tour guide, for those who haven't read the book yet. And then I'm going to read an indoor section in her tenement. And then I'd be happy to talk about the book, talk about writing, talk about the village, anything that's on anybody's mind. Okay, so we join this walking tour in progress. It started in Washington Square. It's a group of 6 women from South Carolina on the tour. Becca is the tour guide. She's a lifelong villager. And the 6 women, you don't have to worry about remembering their names. I always explain who they are when you need to know. Becca asked the tall one named Jackie, who'd arranged the tour on the phone and who had pressed a check discreetly into Becca's hand when they arrived. One of those strange gestures from the land of money. A check Becca had then pressed deep into her pants pocket. Would you mind giving us a real quick orientation? I mean, we've been here a few days now, but some of us have an iffy sense of direction and we keep getting turned around. The others nodded vigorously. Sure, Becca said, patting herself to see if she might be able to produce any props. And then she had an idea. This is going to require some helpers. The woman with the eager face stepped right up, grabbing her balky friend by the hand and yanking her forward. Power in numbers, Connie, said the eager woman, winking at the others. Perfect, said Becca, knowing they expected a dollop of New York and not the milder accent of the Manhattan native. With the women on either side of her, she drew a quick line dividing the eastern half of herself from the west and called it Fifth Avenue, and a diagonal like the most unlikely of beauty pageant banners and called it Broadway, explaining that the world's most famous street grew from paths carved by the native Lenape tribe. She looked down and shrugged as she realized her right breast would have to serve as the Upper West Side and her left, the Upper East. We're all girls here, right? Said Becca, and they all chuckled because she sounded just like them. What do you know? That makes my lungs Central Park, which is great because in the more hokey guidebooks, they always call Central Park the lungs of Manhattan. And my belly is Midtown, and you can figure out for yourselves where the village is, she said, watching a blush spread across their cheeks. My thighs are Soho, my knees Tribeca, and there's the Battery down at my feet. She turned toward the woman on one side and said with a bow, may I present New Jersey, the Garden State. Then she took a gamble and grabbed the hand of Connie, the skeptical friend, and asked her to make a peace sign. Out of the corner of her eye, Becca could see her glare at the others as if to say, I signed on for a tour, not some hippie improv class. But all Becca did was gently raise her arm until it stuck straight out. She drew a line in the air at the woman's waist level. Brooklyn down there, Queens up here, she said. She pointed to the woman's extended arm and said, Long Island, then wiggled her extended fingers and added, North Fork and South Fork. It worked because everyone was having fun, because a hipster couple passing by looked up from their lattes as if they might be missing out on a burgeoning art form. She asked if two of the women wouldn't mind lending their purses for just a second. And before they had time to remember that just as you didn't take candy from a stranger, you certainly didn't hand over your purse to a New Yorker you just met. She placed one on the ground in front of her and the other on top of her head. Lest we forget, Staten Island and the Bronx. The women applauded. She took a bow and a breath and handed back the purses. One of the women called out, because now the tour belonged to all of them, Becca, I used to have this old Joan Baez album, the one where she sings about the crummy hotel over Washington Square. Becca pointed to a big brick building on the west side of the square and sang, I'll Be Damned, the beginning of Diamonds and Rust, in her good, clear alto, a song about a ghost coming around again. It was a song she had once sung as a student at the old High School of Music and Art, where she'd been voted most likely to land on Broadway or in jail for a good cause. Okay, so that's my first little scene. And so now I'm gonna do a scene a little while later after Becca says goodnight to the tourists and trudges on home to her tenement where she was conceived and has lived all her life. The one thing tenements weren't stingy with was heat. At the third floor landing, where Becca stopped to rest, a steam pipe pssed at her as if it had something new to say. The stairwell smelled of eons of old soup. She flung off her cape, which had begun to chafe her neck like a burlap sack. Her perspiration smelled like old soup, too. It was here that the magical staircase had been born. Who invented staircases anyway? Her son, Aaron, now grown, had asked one day when he was 5 or 6. Oh, that's easy, said Becca. Giuseppe Staracasa of Ravenna, Italy. The word staircase is what we call a corruption of the original Italian. This was circa 1547. She couldn't resist slipping in a Latin lesson about the word circa and a history lesson about the Renaissance. Before that, everyone just slid down hills on their tuchuses, which was terrible because everyone's pants were dirty and everyone had a painful condition called tuchus callus. Who invented escalators then? It's a little known fact that they were invented by a woman named, and here Becca paused as if trying to remember while she waited for a good name to materialize. Oh yes, Margaret Escalada, she exclaimed. Funny, her family came from Italy too. Must be because there's so many hills in Italy. But she grew up in our country and she didn't live nearly so long ago. Maybe the post office will issue a stamp with her picture on it. The story goes that she had a little boy with very short, weak legs from a condition called rickets. But don't worry, because little boys never get it anymore, as long as they eat lots of good food with vitamins and get enough exercise. I sure wish we had an escalator. I'll tell you something cool, said Becca, thinking fast. Did you know that we have a magical staircase? Aaron got very still. It's just a tiny bit magical. And you know the building is old, right? He nodded, wide-eyed. That means the magic is old and it's really slow and sometimes it forgets things. How do you work it? He asked very quietly, as if the magic were a cardinal that had lighted on the fire escape. Well, first you have to make a wish. And it can only be a very small wish, like, I wish Cole could come over after school tomorrow. Because like I said, the magic is old and we want to preserve it as long as possible. And then what? Then you have to muster all the discipline you possibly can, which means you have to think about other things and not pester it. It hates to be pestered. Oh, there's one more really important thing. After you make the wish, you have to activate it. How do you think you do that? You tap the banister 3 times, he said. That sends the signal. How did you know? That's exactly it. Mom, do I tell the wish or keep it quiet? Excellent question. That's my favorite thing about the staircase magic. It's not all secretive like birthday wishes. We get to share them with each other. I wish for a hot fudge sundae. Becca grinned because she happened to have a tub of Breyers in the freezer, a couple of squares of baking chocolate in the fridge, and the joy of cooking recipe committed to memory. One more interesting thing I forgot to mention. Most of the wishes take, who knows, months to come true, but you get your first wish granted the very same day. Aaron yelled, woo-hoo, and ran the rest of the way home. Now, alone, she rounded the corner at the 4th floor. The steps sagged from the weight of all their footfalls and wishes. She could have wished for a windfall or a tenure-track position. She wasn't picky anymore. A couple of classes at Borough of Manhattan Community College would do just fine. She could have wished for Aaron to come home from Costa Rica, where a month of post-college volunteering had stretched to an aimless 1.5 years. But the staircase magic was old, and she was very tired. Please let me make the rent this month, she said, and tapped the banister 3 times. At the 5th floor, a genie appeared. Becca smiled at the sight of her neighbor, Ed Korn, a man in a worn white undershirt, trousers, and socks, carrying a neatly tied bag of trash. You look tempest-tossed, he said. Windy out there? Listen, Ed, I have to do something I hate, so I'm going to do it really fast to get it over with. Can you spare $10, just till the check clears? Without saying a word, he put his bag in the chute. The trash clanked on its way down as he fished a skinny billfold from his pocket. And that's the end of that little scene. Thank you, everybody. I wasn't expecting applause in the middle. All right, you guys are the audience. I can answer some questions. I can talk about the novel for a while. I can later do another scene if people want. Yeah, please. Well, I've been a writer for a very long time. I started as a nonfiction writer, a magazine writer, back when there was a magazine industry and you could kind of make a living doing it. I started taking fiction classes a long time ago, working on short stories. You know, when you're learning fiction and you're writing short stories, there's always the novel hanging over your head, right? Thing you're, supposed to tackle at some point, and it's very big there over your head. And so I spent a lot of time not writing a novel, and then I had a big birthday quite a while ago now, and thought, okay, let's take this on. I've been living in the Village for a long time by then. I love the Village. I feel very lucky to live here. I love the characters I've met, the history I've learned. So it made sense for me to write a novel about the Village. So yeah, I had all sorts of, half-baked ideas in my head, little bits of scenes. I wasn't sure who the characters were gonna be, and very gradually stuff accrued over a period of time. You'd kind of chip away at the variables until you got a little something solid to work from. And the hardest part was actually Becca, the main character, sort of finding who she was and what the 3rd-person narrator's relationship to her was, because a lot of the work that you're doing writing a novel, it's about the narration, right? All my writer's studio students are nodding their heads madly, because it's a school that focuses on the creation of narrative personas to get your story told. So thank you. So that's the short answer. Hi, Deborah. Nice to see you. Yes.
Nice to see you. So I was just curious, have you ever taken one of these village tours?
the very first week that Jonathan, who's now my husband, was then my boyfriend, when we moved to the village in 1985, we took a walking tour. And we had a wonderful tour guide who died young. I don't know what happened to him, but he kind of disappeared. He gave us a fantastic tour. We were already kind of, over the moon that we were living in the village at all. But we just fell madly in love with the village, and we met some of the neighborhood characters on that tour. So yes, I took a tour. I think I gave one tour once for one of the organizations I was working for. Didn't feel then like my natural habitat, although now that I've been teaching for many years, I'm much more comfortable talking to lots of people. Yeah, but that's somehow that experience in 1985 stuck with me so long that I somehow knew the main character needed to be a tour guide. Yes.
Why is it called Save the Village? And will you read more?
Oh, thank you. I'd love to. It's called Save the Village because in 1985, Jonathan and I almost instantly, after we took this walking tour and decided we just wanted to be villagers, dig ourselves into the world, we joined an organization, grassroots organization that was called Save the Village. It was founded by a wonderful woman named Pearl Broder, who remains a good friend. She lives in the West Village houses. She took the name from an earlier organization with the same name, and that was Jane Jacobs' organization. People know Jane Jacobs, who wrote the really influential book in 1961 called The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And she was not a trained urban planner, but she was a smart observer of how cities actually work. So that's, the name's got a good provenance, goes back to her group in the 50s and the 60s. Yes, Rowena.
So I would like to hear a little bit more about your journey to giving birth to Becca.
So Becca had a precursor. Early on, when I was in Phil Schultz's masterclass in the writer studio, I created a different village character. Her name was Lila, and she was a stoop sitter because I was fascinated by the women who used to sit out. You don't see as much of it anymore now that the neighborhood is wealthier, but it used to be a frequent sight, and there used to be old Italian ladies who'd sit out in lawn chairs right around here, in fact, around Carmine Street. So I had this character, Lila, who spoke for herself in some little short pieces I was writing. And somehow, how did she evolve into Becca? I'm not sure. I can tell you, I spent a very long time coming up with the names for all these characters. Becca in particular, and her last name, I'm not even sure if it's pronounced Kameyer or Kameyer, but I took it from a building in Chelsea. So on 6th Avenue, between 14th and 23rd Street, it used to be called Ladies Mile, that stretch in these big old former department stores. And on the east side of 20th Street, there's a particularly beautiful, smallish red brick building. That was the Kameyer building, and it was the Kameyer shoe factory originally. And I knew I wanted Becca to have a name with hard sounds in it. So I came up with Becca. I knew her middle name was Naomi for some reason, which I guess I wanted a kind of a Jewish sounding middle name for her. And then one day I was shopping in Chelsea, and they had renovated the building and put out the name of it out front. I think it's no longer there, but it said the Kameyer building, Becca Kameyer, with all those hard sounds. That was just what I wanted. And Melora Ross, who's kind of her nemesis, I gave her a mellifluous, kind of a made up new name, Melora. And Ross, I purposely gave her an anglicized name. A lot of Jewish Rosses didn't start out as Rosses, right? They started out with, long names with a ski on the end of them. So that's how their names came to be. So there was a long period when the whole first chapter was told from the collective point of view of the 6 tourists, which, yeah, which, and I gave this away when I did the craft class at the school, that the reason I did that was because I was in love with the opening chapter of Richard Yates's Revolutionary Road, which is, if people have read the book or seen the movie, it's a scene of a theater, a new community theater. And it's told from the collective point of view of all the people who've come to join the community theater. And I was just enthralled with it. And I loved the way, right from the beginning, you could feel a mood brewing that something bad was going to happen. So the way we do at the Writers Studio, we use excerpts from published work to teach ourselves elements of craft and to try out new stuff and to, you know, open up our imaginations to things we wouldn't have done otherwise. So I started with a collective point of view of the 6 women, and then I knew I had myself a giant problem because no readers can keep 6 characters in their heads, right? It ain't gonna happen. And, you know, and I knew I needed the main character to be at the core of it. So I tried various different alternatives and eventually just went back and forth between the collective 6 tourist point of view and Becca's, and that seemed to work. So it's a lot of trial and error. You know, as I tell students, you know, the more you can love the mess of the process, the happier you will be. Yeah, I saw Jennifer and then Pam.
How long did it take for you to write the book when you started writing?
A long time, close to a decade. I was just telling Emil that I got a major fire lit under me when I realized if I didn't finish it at the end of one calendar year, I was going to go into decade number 2. So I did a lot of work really quickly at the end of 2017. It was. I was not working on it steadily. I spent many years actively not working on it. You know, it spent time in a kind of a delirium of busy work when my mother moved from her condo to assisted living, and I had to, and this was in Connecticut, so I was taking the train, and I did all the work of cleaning out her condo and selling her condo, and you know, that was just, you know, like a gift from the gods or a gift from the devil, really, because you know, I spent a lot of time not even feeling guilty about it. You know, that's the ideal, right? Not doing the work, but having an excuse so you don't have to hate yourself for not doing it. But I did it. I did it. And, you know, when I add up the amount of time I actually spent on it, it was, you know, far less than a decade. Pamela.
So the dialogue is just, that's extraordinary.
Thank you.
Do you pull from things you hear out in the village, or real conversations, or any there that you grab from overhearing it?
I can only think of one little sentence that I maybe took from something I actually heard, and that was, there's a scene that takes place in a community board meeting in the basement of Our Lady of Pompeii, and it's almost a spoof of a community board 2 meeting, because they're almost spoofs of themselves sometimes. And so I forget if it was the guy who was chairing the meeting or one of the other minions. I had him speak a line that I think I remembered hearing, or maybe it was somebody in the audience. There was one line that did come from an actual community board meeting, but other than that, I kind of made it all up. And if you'd asked me 15 years ago, you know, was I a good dialogue writer? I would have said, I don't know how to write dialogue. But yeah, so, you know, so if any of you will, do we have any other writers in the room? I know Deborah, and you look.
Jordana.
Oh, oh, so nice to see you. Thank you for coming. If you find yourself saying, oh, I'm not good at dialogue, or I'm not good at, you know, at whatever element of fiction it may be, try really hard not to listen to that voice, because you don't really have a clue if you are or not. If you let go your preconceived notions, you know, sky's the limit. You never know what you can accomplish. Yes, Meryl.
You've spent so much effort and time and sweat and everything else fleshing out, developing the characters better. And it really shows. And I'm to have to ask the question, is her fictional journey over? Or do you see her perhaps coming back?
People have been asking me that because I won't give away anything that comes at the end, but there are definitely doors left open. No plans at the moment. Yeah, no comment. I have no idea.
She might document your mental door at 2 in the morning and say, well, here's what else you have to write.
I'm waiting to see what bubbles up that, you know, wants to get written. But she hasn't bubbled yet, so I don't know. I don't know. I want to put in a good word for my other baby. This is, do people know what a chapbook is? It's a, you know, short, more tightly edited book of poetry. And this is my second one. My first one's over here, Victory Boulevard. This came out almost the same day as Save the Village. And I feel like it's the poor relation. It's not getting any attention. So I just want you to know that this exists. It's called Just Another Jack, The Private Lives of Nursery Rhymes. It's 8 story poems. Speaking of creating personas, I took on the imagined voices of 8 different familiar nursery rhyme characters and told their stories as I imagined they might have played out in some sort of, you know, this little corner of my mind that lives in this kind of agrarian British Isles past that I call on now and again. So that's there. Oh, Pat Graves just came on screen. Another, oh, yeah. So everybody's waving. Any more questions or requests or anything?
I have a comment.
Yes, Marianne.
That could make me feel uncomfortable. That was good though, because you did a really good job. I read the whole. Don't ask me. I have a terrible memory, so don't say what did you do. But she made me feel uncomfortable because of her financial insecurity. I was worried for her. I mean, you did a really good job of pulling me in and sharing in her financial insecurity.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
That's that sounds like, yeah, the right kind of discomfort to
Yes, it made
have.
me feel just uncomfortable, but that was good.
Well, thank you.
I think you succeeded. I'm not a writer, as you know, but it was really good. And I've known this young lady for many years, so I'm going to.
Thank you for calling me a young lady.
A little anecdote. I had dinner with mutual friends on Sunday, and you know, honor, the mutual friend is an economist, but he never really studied economics, and he's a brilliant economist who's incredibly successful. And so don't get mad at me when I say this. I said, well, you know, my friend wrote this novel, you know, we talk about Michele wrote this novel, and you know, you think, I couldn't possibly know somebody who would write a really good book, because if they know me, they couldn't possibly, because I, you know, and I read it, and I said, oh, that book is really good, you gotta read it. So you passed the I'm too familiar with this person test. And there was the same thing I had said about Honorable. He couldn't possibly be a good economist, because I know him, right? So anyway, I told him he had to read it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so what did, oh, Jennifer, yeah.
One other question. At any point when you were writing it, did you worry that you weren't going to be able to publish it? And if you did, I mean, when you were writing it, was it, did you always feel confident it would become a book and get published? Or were you hoping for the best? And like, what did you say to the voice in your head that maybe you would jump in and say, oh, nobody's going to want to read this, or nobody's going to want to publish this? Or
Well, I would say every voice that you have running through your head, I had running through my head as well. A ton of self-doubt. A feeling that a lot was on the line. If I failed at finishing this thing, you know, it was going to be an indictment of everything about me. And then you kind of have this mix of wild hope that, you know, somebody's going to snap it up, and then a tremendous doubt that nobody's going to go near it. And I went through this process of looking for an agent, being an alumna of the Columbia Writing Program, I was entitled to go to their annual agents mixer in Low Library in the big rotunda. It's the most horrifying thing you can imagine. It's, as bad as speed dating. So there's all these agents who look like they're 17 and they're wearing one color name tags. And then all of us aspiring writers are wearing a different color. And so, and they're just stationed around this darkened room. And it's your job to go up to them and give them your pitch. But you have to wait online because there's, 7 other people doing their pitch before you. It was horrible. I did it twice. And the goal is to come away with their card. If they give you their card, you're on the right track. And so I came away with a bunch of cards, and then you go to the agency website and you find out what they want you to send them. Every single agency has a different set of requirements, Chapter 1, first 10 pages, first 50 pages, whole manuscript. It's always different. I had a really painful experience, but helpful ultimately, where I was talking to one of these agents and she kept smiling and nodding her head. So I kept talking. And finally she goes like this, which, I do to you guys lately. That's why it's so fraught for me doing that. And she said, a word to the wise, you need to get your pitch. And I knew this, we all hear about the elevator pitch, right? But she seemed so excited that I kept talking. And so, I just wanted to die, but I thought, no, let's be constructive here. She's teaching me something I need to know, and let me hone the pitch. And so I did over time. So I came very close a bunch of times, but I didn't get an agent. They talk their agents speak, and you don't know quite what they really mean, that it's not quite right for my list. And maybe they're just being honest. Maybe it's just not quite right for their list. And then I realized that there's this whole alternative universe out there of independent publishers, and that you can go directly to them in many cases, not in all cases. So I started doing my due diligence, getting to know who the players were. And one day I called up some new list I hadn't seen before of, top independent publishers, and Regal House popped up. I'd never come across them before, knew nothing. I went to their website. I really liked their website. It was professional, but it had a kind of a warmth and friendliness about it. And I thought, oh, this feels good. And sure enough, they felt the same way about me. So, it felt like a long time when it wasn't happening. And then, and I knew that all along, that all you need is one, right? Just like with anything important in life, right? You just, you've got to find the right one. And they've turned out to be, in many ways, really terrific. I really like them. And they just won a big award. They just were Independent Publisher of the Year from the Forward Reviews, that's the journal that, focuses entirely on independent publishing. So I was very happy for them. They're only 8 years old, but I think that really helped put them on the map. So that was really great. Do we have questions from? No, nobody's asking questions.
I guess I have a question.
Yes, please, Jordana. Yeah.
I haven't read the book yet.
That's okay. You can buy it.
So, but I'm hearing that Becca is the main character, and very deeply infused and invested in. And I'm wondering, to what extent did you invest in the characters that orbit around her?
Oh, everybody. I took them all very much to heart. I kind of love them all. There are those who say you shouldn't love your characters, you should use your characters, but I don't know. I like to love my characters. Even, there's somebody, a kind of a minor player, but who sets a major thing in motion in the book, and who's a very troubled bad guy, but I even kind of loved him. And then I've got this sort of a plot device running through. There's a secondary character who's a local reporter at the local weekly newspaper. And he's got a bit of a plot line himself, but I guess I guess when people say, you use your characters, I guess I maybe used him in that I had a lot of factual information I had to convey about what was going on in the village during this week when the story takes place. So I created his articles for the paper, and then I also created his unpublished writers and reporters notebooks where he could reveal private stuff. Because, it's your novel, you can do whatever you want, right? You can, make it serve your needs. And so I mentioned this other character, Melora Ross, who's kind of the yuppie scum nemesis. She and Becca used to be best friends. You'll find all this out. But I kind of love her. And she's got a trajectory through the story. She goes through changes. So yeah, I don't know. I love them all. You were a mighty fine writer. I remember you. People want to hear some more? All right, I said I wasn't going to do the bonfire scene because I often do it, but do it. Oh, all right, it's kind of my greatest hit. Right, okay, give me a second, I got to find it. It's right after this one, I believe. No, not yet. There it is. Okay, so without wanting to give too much away, something very, very bad happens after Becca says goodnight to the 6 tourists and leaves them in Washington Square. And people die, the power is out in the village. The book is organized by, it's got chapters, but it's also got broader headings of days of the week, because it all takes place in the week after this thing happens. And the reason I did that was I just remembered after 9/11 how incredibly distinct each day that followed was, and how everybody was wide open in ways that they aren't usually, even though, they just, witnessed a terrible tragedy. So this is Tuesday, the tour, the first tour takes place on Monday. This is Tuesday evening. And the chapter is called Ollie Ollie Oxenfree. Evening finally arrived and everyone on Becca's block came out. The old commies with the berets and the onion roll breath, the artists in the ironically oversized polyester clothes from the Westbeth basement sale, and the young families with their titanium strollers, each the color of a different tropical fruit. The vegans came out with baba ganoush. At first, people stood or sat on the nearest stoops, but then a young enterprising dad brought down a shrink-wrapped pack of wood he'd bought for the weekend house and built a fire right in the street. Won't the cobblestones melt? Asked the kids who gathered round. Won't the fire spread? No one knew. This had never happened before. Becca smelled wood smoke from the 5th floor, looked out her window, grabbed her father's old army blanket, and ran down. Mindy, the super's wife, and Ed from next door scooted aside to make room. And for a little while at least, the old timers almost forgot to resent the newcomers, and the newcomers decided that maybe the old timers weren't quite so moth-bitten and pleased with themselves. We're like a page out of Jane Jacobs, said one of the hipsters. Food appeared like magic. Ears of Jersey corn from someone's freezer, chicken kebabs, a braided challah. In the middle was a stick of softening butter, and people were tearing off hunks of sweet bread and using the butter like dip. Becca placed her hands behind her on the cobblestones. She felt the sturdy surface of the granite that was said to have been brought from Europe as ship ballast. And in the spaces in between, she felt what might have been actual earth. And she had a strong sensation of sitting on her slowly spinning planet. The Jamaican babysitters who'd been invited to spend the night stood on the sidelines in their sensible heels and their tucked in blouses. Sing us a Jamaican song, said the young dads. We've heard you sing lullabies. We know you sing like angels. But the good Christian nannies demurred, smiling at the very idea. The Maltese supers with their tinkling accents brought out a bocce set and gathered around with the Ecuadorians and the Mexicans. And then, when no one was watching, the Jamaican nannies conferred. They spread out in a line across the street, softly swung their hips in unison and sang a song with a refrain like small waves lapping Caribbean sand. Coming down with a bunch of roses, coming down. Everyone joined in. All that's missing is a steel drum, said one of the young moms. And a few minutes later, there was a steel drum and Dixie cups, a bottle of Bacardi, and a sweating carton of pineapple juice. And they all drank through the dinner hour until the past and the future grew soft and remote. Becca poked the fire with foil and sparks rose into the sky. Another dad brought out a stack of downtown yellow pages and threw them on the fire. The adopted Chinese daughters of the New York Times reporters next door grew mesmerized. Fire lettuce, said Sophie, and fire potato chips. Fire lasagna noodles, added Hannah. Sparks rose and joined against the sky, now a deep shade of teal. Community Board Chair Emerita, Frida Glaberson, and her husband Sheldon, out for their regular evening stroll, stopped by. Frida rubbed Becca's shoulders and Becca reached up and gave Frida's hand a squeeze. Someone shone a light and for a second, Becca saw Camille's ancient lined face at her window, winking her approval. Someone produced a box of sparklers and the kids ran down the street with crackling gold in their hands. Even the teenagers who ordinarily vanished at this hour into cyberspace or mysterious outings with unnamed peers stayed in view and helped. Tomorrow, the machines would whir back into action and all the little LEDs would glow. The culprit would be found and repairs would begin. After all, if New York City's workers could clean up ground zero, they could certainly fix little old Washington Square. But right now, nothing was pressing. Tonight was a block party, free from pad thai vendors and tube socks. Tonight was a pre-cash society. The super's youngest, Jamie, crawled into Becca's lap and she wrapped her arms around his soft belly and stroked his fine black hair. She'd forgotten how warm bodies are. She could feel Ed's bony knees on her right and Mindy's sturdy thigh on her left. And she looked at all the faces lit a soft orange from the fire. She couldn't remember ever being so happy. The air smelled of roasting meat. Her face and chest were flushed and her rear end was cold. And for a moment of grace, the two balanced each other perfectly. This is the way humans are meant to live, she thought, close to the earth and the elements and each other. A log settled and sent off sparks, and everyone watched the sparks form lines of text in some gorgeous unknown language. The sky was having a sample sale of stars, beautiful white stars of all sizes, twinkling the way they did in the kids' song, the way they did in the ceiling of Grand Central. Then an ordinary fluorescent flickered in the distance and everyone went still. And it's just a generator over at St. Vincent's, folks, said the know-it-all chair of the Community Board Land Use Committee. Don't get your hopes up. But Becca wished the lights would never come on. They wrapped up the food and someone dragged over a trash can and a garden hose and put out the fire. The street hissed and a rush of smoky butter-scented steam rose. The black air turned moist and white, and then the sound died down. The young families gathered up their belongings and went home first. Eventually, there was a caravan back to Becca's building. Carlos, the super, had disappeared as he so often did, so Mindy herded the kids by herself. A few older gay couples, old Mrs. Goldman, the single mom, and her daughter. Is there any dark as absolute as a tenement hallway in a blackout? One by one, the neighbors exited the stairwell and groped their way down the hall to their own doorknobs. Night, they called, each like a lighthouse keeper climbing the rocks for the night shift. There. Thank you. So I can tell you one thing, when I've got the Jamaican nannies singing their Jamaican song, that's something that actually happened when I was in Bleecker Street Playground one day, just randomly. I don't know what made it happen, but the Jamaican nannies, damned if they didn't, in their heels and their proper blouses and tucked in, their skirts with their blouses tucked in, they spread out and they sang. And that song, I can't find it online anywhere, and forgive me, I'm not a singer. I'm not good at conveying. What it was like was, it was just beautiful, beautiful song. And I just remembered that snippet of it. So I put it in. I mean, that's, as painful as the writing process is, it's also just this glorious thing that you get to just, put your treasures in it, right? And treasures that, nobody else knows the origin of, unless you tell them the way I just told you one. It's really kind of thrilling. Anybody have questions, comments, anything? Okay, a quiet bunch. And you people out there, Pat Gray, unmute yourself, Pat.
Okay. I read this book and loved every minute of it.
Can you get just a second? Can people hear? I'll relay the question. Yes, Pat.
It's not a question, it's a comment.
Okay, it's a comment.
When I read this book, I guess because I know you live in the village, I'm
going to stop and repeat. She said she read the book and loved it, and because she knows that I live in the village. Did I miss? I missed another piece.
That's it.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay.
I found myself questioning, even though I knew this was fiction, all through the book. I was having to say to myself, stop it, this is fiction. I kept thinking these people were real. And the journals that you wrote for the Reporter and the articles that you wrote for the Reporter. Do you want me to stop?
No. Oh yeah, I guess so. She's saying she kept feeling like the characters and the situations were real, even though she knows it's fiction. And she's asking now about the Reporter and his notebooks.
That was so well done that I honestly kept saying to myself, okay, this is a real report that showed up in their newspaper. And I had to convince myself that they weren't. I thought that you did an amazing job at making this feel real, the whole book. So
Well,
that's
thank you very much, Pat. Well, I think you know that for many years I wrote for our real weekly paper, The Villager. So I called on that experience to when I did the reports, and then I sort of slipped into the unpublished stuff where Jay could reveal more of his private self. But thank you for that, Pat. And hi, Lael. And oh boy, Chris Higgins in Tempe, Arizona. Come on, you got me here. You can ask me, ask me writing questions, ask me village questions. Yeah, Pamela.
So do you have a process, like is it a time day, but you see, do you have, for this or for your other?
Well, for this, yes. And it took me a very long time to arrive at a workable routine. Yeah. The rule was that I had to keep my butt in the chair for at least an hour every day, no matter how painful it was, and I couldn't get up. And that was, and sometimes I'd have to set a timer to really force myself not to get up in between. I think increasingly, as the years go on and we get more and more addicted to our devices, and I don't even have a laptop that I use. I don't have a smartphone, quite on purpose, but even so, that the impulse to run and check the darn email is really strong. So I really, really forced myself not to do that. And that was so that I could get past all the initial resistance that rises every time you sit down, right? And find what was lurking behind it. And I must say, that's how I got the thing written. But, learning to trust more and more that there's an imagination that's running in the background all the time. And that some of us have a really hard time finding the doorway to it. And I'm one of those people with, a sort of overdeveloped super ego, right? That, I'm good at getting stuff done, crossing things off lists, doing busy work. And it was just very hard to let go, but yeah, that's what I did.
Long hair,
I always start in whatever I'm writing, I always start longhand. And when I feel like maybe I've got something worth something, then I put it on the computer and, then I can see it more clearly if there's something there or not. Yeah, Amy.
Your hour a day, did you set a fixed time for it, or was it just?
It varied. I tried to do it as early in the morning as I could. I think there's a lot to be said for falling out of bed and writing before all the filters. But I never managed to do that. And I had kids at home too. Yeah, I was not so good about doing that. But yeah, somehow I did it. Yeah. Yes.
As a long-term village resident, were there any moments when you realized that this place was affecting any of your decisions in writing, say, the village, character or plot or anything? When you went, aha, this place, I might not have done that if I had lived in a different place 20 years ago, or other places you might have lived.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always knew I was going to write about the village because I just love villagers. I love the place. I love the buildings. I love all of it. I love the history. Yeah, and it's very interesting now when I think about, is there going to be another novel? Because I actually started writing poems in 2015, having never written poems hardly at all. And now I've been writing exclusively poetry and nonfiction. So go figure, like the novel comes out and I haven't been writing fiction. But yeah, but I think whatever fiction I will write, sense of place is always really important to me. That's the thing that anchors me. It gives me a known in a sea of unknowns. And I also feel very attached in some ways to my hometown in Connecticut, Norwalk, Connecticut. And, I've thought about writing about that. I get much more mixed feelings about it. I think the places where my dreams take place, I don't know if other people have this, that when I'm asleep, I have about a dozen alternative villages in New York Cities in general that are sort of like the real one, but sort of not. And then my hometown also is constantly making these weird appearances where it, looks like the real town, but, I'm hopping from place to place, or, something's off in some way. So, yeah, it seems to me that place is as good a thing as any to anchor a story. If you can see it and feel it. So that's where I tend to go first. And in terms of the village, I was mostly using my own lived experience. I didn't do a lot of research because I had done a lot of reading when we first moved to the village, when they got really fascinated by city history. So I had a storehouse of information, although I'm not a good fact person. My husband's the keeper of the facts in the household. I sometimes had to look stuff up to see, I remember what it felt like or what it smelled like, but I didn't remember, how big it was, or so, I had to look up stuff like that. Rowena, yeah.
Again, about your characters. How much are there any parts of you or you?
Oh, people always want to know that. Every character is made up out of my head. Every character is me, every character is not me. You take bits and pieces. I gave Becca some traits that I have. I gave her many traits that I don't have, some that I think are admirable, some that I think are not so admirable. The way she lives hand to mouth, yeah, it's upsetting. I just feel like a very lucky woman that I don't have to live that way. I could so easily imagine, certain tweaks in the universe, and I could have been that, that fifth floor walk-up dweller so very easily. I also feel like there was this generation, my parents' generation, who, they were the ones who got away from that world. My parents they both grew up in Staten Island. My mother was born in Crown Heights, though. Poor, depression. But my father, after the war, got a college education on the GI Bill, and became a doctor. And we moved to a nice house in the suburbs surrounded by woods. And I just feel like so easily, what if things had not gone that way? I could so easily have led a very different life. And I guess that's maybe one reason, in addition to my love of the village and villagers, one reason I was drawn to a character like Becca. So to get back to your question though, Rowena, Becca sews, I sew, I gave her that. Melora, she's based in part on my experiences when my kids were little and I was taking them on play dates. And we had people in nursery school who lived in, walk-ups, and we had people who lived in entire townhouses. So I guess Melora was sort of born out of that experience of going on play dates to townhouses where one family lived with a nanny, and there was an elevator, and the nanny would bake cookies for you and you never see the mom, and it was really weird. So yeah, and then Jay, the journalist, of course, I gave him that little piece of, I wasn't thinking consciously about any of this, but that was the stuff that was available to me to call on. So yeah, it's some of yeah, Pamela.
So do you outline it, or you want to say, okay, I'm going here?
Oh God, I tried everything. I was never a big index card. I was never an index card person, but I did do the index card thing. And there's this wonderful book by Robert Olin Butler called From Where You Dream. I always recommend it to my students. It's his how to write fiction book, and I think it's my favorite of all of them, I think. And he has a good method that involves index cards, which is why I went with the index cards. They sat there on the corner of the desk collecting dust at a certain point. I think, probably all these things I tried, moved me a little closer. But there were many outlines. I had to make timelines to make sure everybody's age came out right. Yeah, there were, I filled notebooks with all this stuff. And it was just trial and error. Yeah, no one method. Yeah, Jordan.
So many questions. One is, I'm guessing, by the way you're talking about, that you were figuring out what's going to happen and how the characters are going to evolve, or the story will resolve as you went. Did you go back and rewrite a lot, or did you keep a forward moving stance the whole time? Like,
Oh, it was back and forth constantly. And one thing I'll say about that process of putting the butt in the chair, I do remember one day specifically, I was sitting on my bed with my backrest, forcing myself to sit there. And one of those days is when I dreamed up the whole scene that happens late in the book, for those who've read it, in the South Carolina stuff, where Mark tells a story, and that came out of God knows where, just, whole cloth, just made it up, because I got myself relaxed enough to hear what my unconscious, the gifts it wanted to give me that day. And I still kind of, I read that part and think, I don't know where that came from. But yeah.
This is connected.
Okay.
So when you were writing, at what point did you figure out, oh, this is what it's really about, if you ever figured that out? And how did that influence as you continue to write?
Again, it was fits and starts, you know, you see maybe a little glimmer of, oh, this is the core of the heart of it. And then, you know, and then the next day it's gone and you can't find it, right? And you find it again a little differently the next time. There was no secret to it. It was just, you know, just chipping away at the unknowns until I could see what I had. As I said, the first chapter got rewritten very deep into it. I knew, you know, I knew it was problematic, but I kept moving forward despite that as a placeholder. And I think that's really common and maybe even advisable to get yourself something that's just okay, that's, you know, close enough. And if you can bear it to keep moving forward and let the things that you learn as you move forward inform what you have to do when you go back to the beginning. Because I think it's very rare that something comes out in finished form. I mean, I did the first few lines of the first chapter came out instantly. You know, like the first week I decided to try doing this thing. But then boy, did it bog down after that. I see we're at the hour mark, so we should probably wrap up. And so nobody's got any questions. Oh, thank you, Lael.
I would recommend that everybody read the book. I thought it was great. And I was sad when it was over.
Oh, thank
I didn't
you.
want it to end.
Oh, thank you, Marianne. So before you go, I've got books here. I would love to sell books. I would love to sign books. Thank you, everybody. And think ahead to next Christmas. You can get your Christmas shopping done now. You can buy the whole package if you want. I've got change. I take checks or cash. It would be so lovely not to walk home with, or actually I'm on my bike, but still not to schlep all these home. I would love that. Thank you, everybody. It's so not, you're such a good group. And see, I've trained my students well, right? Yeah. They're great at asking questions. So, and all of you out there, I don't see the list, but I saw a little snippet of it before we started. And I know that Wendy Richards in Sydney, Australia is there and a bunch of other people. So thank you all for coming. Okay, and I guess we'll wrap up. So I'll stick around and